am really excited to have Julie Satow with us today. She was on my wish list for the fall, and the fall came early this year. It's like the Jewish holidays, they're never quite on time. So thrilled to have Julie with us today. Her new book, The Woman Who Ran Fifth Avenue, just came out to the most incredible reviews. I'm sure you've seen it written about in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, NPR. It's just incredible. It's a really fun read. It's a social history. It's on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's only been out for 3 weeks. It's a history of the era of great department stores, but primarily told through 3 remarkable women who presided over 3 of the most glamorous of those stores, Henry Bendel's, Lord and Taylor, and Bonwit Teller. You know, it's kind of like Soph's through shopping. Julie, put your camera on and welcome.
Yes, here I am.
Hi, welcome to At Lunch. Although I guess for you, this is kind of at breakfast because you're
Yeah, well, it's true. I'm
you're
still
out
having
in,
coffee.
so tell me, what are you doing in LA?
Yeah, so I do have an event tomorrow night. So if anyone's in Santa Monica, I'll be at Zibby's bookshop having an event. But I'm here mostly because my kids love this day camp. During the pandemic, we decided to like go to LA for a month and just do like an Airbnb. My husband he's a journalist, he has a bureau out here. So we did it as kind of an adventure. And I put them in a day camp, and now they're absolutely obsessed with the day camp. And this is our 3rd summer. We're sort of roped into this. So yeah, so I managed to do some book events and, you know, wrap it into my tour and also have the kids enjoy their camp. So
a perfect answer for a professional woman writing about professional women multitasking.
There you go.
So before we came on, Julie was worried, are people going to be sad because it's not Shayna and talking about this? But the first comment that's come up in the chat is, hi, Julie, love the book. As you know, in the Berkshires where the weather has just turned delightful. So there you go. So you've got a lot of fans here already, somebody tuning in from Dallas and all over the place. So, so this book is in, I'm going to hold it up, and there is a way you can purchase it in the chat. We'll keep reminding you of that, although go to your local bookstore if you have one, because we like to support independent bookstores. But aside from having a very classy cover, what's inside is even better. I've been having the best time reading the book. It's my favorite kind of thing where you have personal stories interwoven with sociology and history, and it's quite incredible. And, you know, true confession, I know, Julie, we spent a number of hours in the dog park together, commiserating over the misery of the writer's life. And I think people would find it really interesting, Julie, to know about the genesis of this project. How did it get started? Where did you get the idea from?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, well, this is my second narrative nonfiction book, my second book. And the first one was about the Plaza Hotel, and it was kind of a social history of New York and told through the lens of the hotel. And it was, you know, I love the book. I love this one a lot more. Basically, my agent was like, oh, maybe you should do like department stores. She wanted to do Store Wars, was her idea, which she's great at book ideas, but I was like, I really want to write about people. And so I just it was the pandemic, and I sort of went down this research rabbit hole. I started like investigating the world of department stores. I was kind of shocked to find out they were these like feminine universes, kind of these places where women could have these big careers, and I just sort of got really into it. And then I stumbled on these 3 characters, and I was like, wow, they were so compelling, they're so amazing. I felt so much like affinity with them. There I was at home struggling as a working mom, looking at what they were going through in the 30s and the 40s, you know, feeling like a lot of connection there. And I felt like their 3 lives, they kind of traced through the whole 20th century and really place us in the world of department stores, but also through their stories, the history of women in work and everything. So I just was like, oh, I have my book idea. So that was what happened.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. And, you know, for me, you know, I'm a big fan of movies from the 50s and 60s, you know, the sort of glamour girl movies, which all seem to have been set in department stores.
Sure.
But it's kind of fascinating to me that, you know, I think one of the things that really surprised me in your book was that the heyday of these stores was really much earlier than I thought. You know, it was really at a time when the economy was not so good in the country. And so tell me a little bit about the, you know, the setting of the story. When is it that you're writing about? And
Yeah.
about that sort of sociology of what these things represented in the culture.
Yeah, they really were sort of these American cultural institutions. I think now we kind of forget that because obviously department stores are far different from what they were in their heyday. Starting around, you know, the Gilded Age, the turn of the century, the first department stores started to come to the fore. You know, they began in Paris, as you can imagine. They came to America, and you know, in New York, really, actually down in Tribeca, was like the first American department store. Kind of that whole Ladies Mile, which some of us might know, or you know, have read about, where it was really this moment where these amazing stores were opening, and these were not like, you know, these were universes unto themselves. I mean, you could spend an entire day there. You could, as I say in the book, plan your wedding or your funeral there. You could go to the Western Union office. They had miniature zoos. They did, you know, they had huge art programs where you could see Picasso's, you could see Art Deco furniture, you could do all of that. You know, they were really these meeting places where also, you know, you could have $10, you know, underwear, or you could buy mink coats. The price points were huge. And it was this opportunity for women to kind of congregate in public. And as I mentioned, in Ladies Mile era and stuff, it was very dangerous or considered uncouth or impolite for women to be alone in the public sphere without a male chaperone. And so these stores really gave women the opportunity. And there was a whole new kind of, you know, habit of window shopping, like that had never been before. So it was really this kind of cultural moment in time.
But that's so interesting. And you know, I mean, I said it sort of tongue in cheek at the beginning that it's subsphere shopping, but actually it was kind of subsphere shopping. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. I mean, you've sort of alluded to the freedom it accorded women on the shopping side, but talk to
Yes.
us a little bit about what it offered women on the work side, on the professional
Yeah.
side.
I know. When you said this, when I knew I was taking the place of the irreplaceable Shayna Taub, I was like, oh, there is actually some overlap there, because absolutely, you know, women, as I mentioned, as consumers, they had the power of the wallet, which was very unique. And, you know, they had male managers who were there to really serve them. So that was a power imbalance that they didn't typically enjoy, that they had at the department store. Certainly from the employee perspective, it was, you know, it was absolutely revolutionary, because women could have these very fulsome careers. These weren't just, you know, jobs. In many cases, they could rise through the ranks. I cover one in 1906 in San Francisco. She was a dust girl, and she started out, you know, dusting china. She was just trying to raise some money to help her family when she was, you know, a young teenager. And by her early 20s, she was a powerful buyer. She was earning enough money that she had bought her family a new home. They had moved out of the Mission District into the, you know, across the bay, and she was supporting them. I mean, this was very unusual. This is 1910s. So, you know, they had, as I mentioned, they were these kind of universes. They gave their employees, you know, training programs. They taught them accounting. They were given, you know, free vacations. They had their own cafeterias so they could eat, you know, good, nutritious food. It was just a whole world for these women employees. So
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I don't know if you felt that way, but you know, we always talk about the women's revolution or the women's movement and thinking that that started in the 60s. And of course, there was subs many, many decades before that. But then in between, there was this whole world of women working, and also at all levels. If you could talk about the sort of sociology within the department store. So yes, you could become a woman and succeed at the top, but what about
Well, and I should say that's very rare. I mean, that was not
Yeah.
super common, you know. I mean, as I say in the marketing material for the book, you know, we've all heard of Macy's or Bloomingdale's. Those were real men, you know, Bloomingdale's brothers or Roland Macy's. But, you know, so the men, their names were on the buildings, but inside women ruled. And in many ways that is true, even though at the highest level they were men. Really there were, you know, you could go from, as I mentioned, a dust girl that's sort of earning, you know, just a few dollars an hour to buyers who were the most powerful positions. They really managed huge staffs. They had big budgets. They were going to France, you know, multiple times a year to the Parisian fashion shows. You know, it was a very big deal for those women. But you could have all sorts of levels. There were stock girl, you know, stock people. Usually, you know, there was also a racial, somewhat of a racial equality, a bit more in the department stores than in other industries. So yeah.
Because there were Black people working in the stores.
So basically for that, I mean, I have in the book a fascinating
Yeah.
story about uh, the first Black women-owned department store, which was amazing, which happened in Richmond, Virginia, which, as you may know, is like the seat of the Confederacy. And this was just right after the Civil War. So it was absolutely amazing that that happened. But for the most part, you know, African Americans were working behind the scenes as the elevator men or in the stockroom. But in the 40s, and it was actually a Jewish woman who was one of the first ones to do this, began hiring African American women in the front of the store as saleswomen. So that was, you know, in the 40s. So it was not early, but it was, you know, sort of on the vanguard of that in some ways.
So I want to talk about your main characters, because one of the things I love about the book is, yes, department stores we think of as a very New York phenomenon, and the stores you highlight are sort of the, you know, at the pinnacle of the New York shopping mecca experience. But the women were not from here necessarily, and you traveled all over the country to track them down. So, I mean, you were in Utah of all places. And so if you could
Nina,
talk a little just about
Arkansas.
the reporting experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Arkansas. So if you could talk, you know, and the Ku Klux Klan, I mean, all these weird sort of connections. So if you could just tell us a little bit about how you zeroed in on these women, and then where your journey took them to find out who they were.
Yeah. So, you know, there's so many women that did amazing things. And I've been contacted by readers like, why didn't you cover this woman or that one? There were so many, honestly. But I tried to limit it to 3 who were presidents of the stores, just because that is so unusual. And they were really the first of their kind. So I felt like it was a good way to, as you know, you have to kind of limit your reporting. So the first woman was Hortense Odlum, and her grandparents were early converts to the Mormon religion, and they came from Europe and they followed Brigham Young to Utah. They were some of the first white settlers in Utah. And she grew up, I mean, she was making her own clothes. I mean, this was very far from the Fifth Avenue department store world. She was growing her own food. You know, she was really in this like pioneer town in Utah. And I did go to St. George and do research there. And, you know, through various things, she ends up in New York, and she ends up, even though she'd never had a paying job before, ends up being president of Bonwit Teller in 1934. So you can imagine. The next woman, Dorothy Shaver, is perhaps one of the more famous of the women. She arrived in 1919 to New York City, so very much in the Suffs vein, before women had the right to vote. She came with her sister, just a suitcase between them, and they came from Mena, Arkansas, which I can tell you is a world away from New York City and the department store world. And yes, her grandfather was very senior in the KKK and was the county sheriff. And she ended up having a very different life. You know, she was the president of Lord & Taylor in 1945, and Life magazine called her America's #1 career woman. She had the highest published salary of a woman that we know of, so she was a powerhouse. And the last woman was Geraldine Stutz, who is the more recent of the women. And you talked about like the 1960s and the women's movement. That's what I'm also more familiar with. And she felt more familiar, but she came from outside Chicago, a very strict Catholic upbringing. And I know this is a Jewish Historical Society, so department stores we all think are so Jewish, which is true. I, of course, am Jewish, but I ended up with three women who were, a Mormon, a Protestant, and a lapsed Catholic. So I don't know how that happened, but she was very Catholic in her upbringing. She ended up, not being religious herself, and she lived this very chic life in New York City with the 60s and 70s at Bendel's. So as president of Bendel's.
So as you're talking, I have to say, when you said you were in LA, I thought you were out there doing the TV series deal.
Oh, I wish.
I hope somebody on this show is in show business, because I just it'd be
the
such a
option
good.
is still available right now.
Yeah, to me it seems like such a great series. Plus, you can have all these great clothes and all the political stuff going on. So I'm sending the plug out there.
Really option it. Come and do it.
No, we can produce it. Well, you mentioned the Plaza book, which I know you may not love as much as this book, and I actually like this book better, but that was also a great book and very entertaining. And but you've also written a lot of other real estate stories. That's been sort of your beat for a long time, for the Times and for other places. And what I've really enjoyed about your writing about real estate is that for you, real estate is just sort of, oh, and I should mention your husband, Stuart Elliott, is the editor of The Real Deal. So you've got real estate coming and going in your life. But, what I love is that you use real estate as a window into scam artists and sociological issues and issues of really affordable housing versus gentrification. I mean, it's been really interesting to see how you use that as a, and what's America, but a story of real estate development. And so I was wondering, how did you decide originally that this would be the place where you made your, you sort of chose this as the lens you were going to look at?
My career has been like you, I mean, a progression. I started out as a beat reporter, a newspaper reporter, a business reporter. I fell into the real estate beat. I covered that for a long time. When I started to have a family, I became more of a freelancer. I stopped, being on staff so I could help with that. And it's a constant juggle. And I see myself, trying to always push myself and grow. And so the Plaza book came out of, I had done some features for the Times, and I'd gotten some book agents as a result, interested in my writing. And it made sense to do a real estate focused book for my first book. But I really wanted to kind of explore other things. I feel like I have more to say than only just real estate stuff. And like I said, I really wanted to push myself professionally. So doing a biography, a group biography of women, it's something very close to my heart. And I felt passionate about the topic and the characters. And it was really hard. It was pushing myself outside my comfort zone, outside that real estate sphere, and really, doing something new. So I'm hoping now I've proved myself, and I can spread my wings to different things. So
I really think you have, because you've really done a great job of bringing these women and their stories to life and this epic of American history. And I meant to ask you earlier about department stores. So I moved to New York from a very tiny town in Ohio, and those stores, Bonwit Teller, Lord and Taylor, to me were like totally intimidating, just as places to go. And my husband comes from suburban St. Louis, and his mother loved department stores. That was just her. What you're talking about, she just loved hanging out in them and being there and shopping as well. But I was wondering for you, you talked about it a little bit, I think, in the afterword, about a couple of childhood memories, but what was you and your family's connection to the Fifth Avenue world?
Yeah, my grandmother loved to shop. She lived in Altoona, Pennsylvania, so we would go, sometimes we would go to like Kaufman's in Pittsburgh as a big thing,
Oh, yeah.
But I remember, I feel like the department store, and then later on, I lived in New Jersey, and I think I mentioned my afterward, my mom would take me, and right before the school year, to Bloomingdale's, and we would get our school clothes for the year, which was always so exciting. I have memories of it. It was a part of, like, you needed something and you might go to the department store. That was a thing you used to do. You could find a variety of things, or, you wanted to have a fancy lunch, or obviously visit, the Easter Bunny, which, or whatever it might be, see the windows. That was always something just like fun and glamorous, and a world that was, special and unique and dramatic, and you felt, special and glamorous there. So it's something I miss about today's world, I think. Obviously the plaza, it's the same kind of idea, that nostalgia, that, you know.
Yeah, that urge for that, I guess, sense of coming together to be in this place that takes you to another world. Maybe it's sort of the
Yeah.
Disneyland of shopping or
I mean,
something.
where else? Yeah, where else are you, do you get to try on perfumes, or get served, served water while you lounge around and people bring you beautiful clothing? Or, I mean, back in the day, the services were absolutely amazing. I mean, I came at the very tail end of that. I didn't really get to enjoy that full thing. But I mean, you could, in the early department stores, you could drop your kids off at this amazing nursery where they would watch your children and feed them ice cream sundaes, and you could go, have lunch with your friends in the tea room, have your hair done, buy your clothes, all of that stuff. They were, fabulous, fabulous
Yeah, it's
experiences.
really sad. I'm surprised somebody hasn't brought it back, or maybe they will. Maybe your book will inspire not only a TV series, but I don't know. I
Fingers
know.
crossed. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned something I was going to ask you about. I think when we first talked about the book, and I had actually first talked to you a while ago, that at some
Yeah.
point I wanted to have you on the program. You had said, but none of the protagonists are Jewish, and I'm wondering. I think all of us, and you have a character in your book who's modeled on the department store lady from, although I guess she's not a dominatrix, from Mad Men, as she was in a later series. But
Yes.
but there were a lot of Jews in the retailing business and in the department store business. And I'm wondering, was that conflict you see in Mad Men real? The fact that the Jewish stores were different, Bloomingdale's was different than, I mean, obviously they
Yeah.
were different, but
Yeah.
was it?
And I mean, yeah, I think, we all had like our favorite store, right? So there was definitely more the like Jewish department store versus like maybe where the WASPy people shop. I don't know, like depending on your town and where. Um, and I do have a section of amazing Jewish merchants, women merchants. And I think it's really interesting. You mentioned, Mad Men. So Beatrice Fox Auerbach was a single Jewish woman who took over her father's department store in Hartford, Connecticut, G. Fox's, when he died, in the, in that era in the 40s. And she was a phenom. She was amazing. And there are so many similarities between her and Rachel Menken, who is the love interest for Don Draper in Mad Men. And actually, her great granddaughter emailed me after the book came out about it, but which was amazing. Yeah, Rena emailed me, but she in Mad Men, it was supposedly she was Don Draper's one true love, and he had many loves, but she was this beautiful Jewish woman who ran this department store. And Beatrice was very similar. She had a lot of the similar things, and as I mentioned earlier, hiring women, Black women women in the sales, as the saleswomen, that was her. And she did that in 1942. She was one of the first ones to do that. And it was pretty revolutionary. She didn't fire a single person during the Great Depression, which is, shocking. I mean, she was amazing. But it's interesting. So there's an example where she inherited the position. I Magnin, some of you might remember, in San Francisco, was actually founded by the daughter of a rabbi. It was a woman, and she named the department store after her husband, Isaac Magnin. So it was not her own name, it was his name. So I don't know what to, she stayed there. She was really important for the running of the store, but she did not want to put her name on the building. So, yeah, and Lane Bryant, which a lot of you might know, was actually Lena Himmelstein. So she was an immigrant woman, and it was like a spelling mistake that a bank clerk made that came to Lane Bryant. So I mean, there's definitely a history of that. It just happened to be the way I structured the story. They weren't Jewish, sadly.
So one of the questions I ask every guest, because this interview will become part of the AJHS archive, is your own Jewish identity and how you think it's affected your work and how you think it's affected your life. I know that's probably for your psychiatrist, but if you could give us the
No, I mean, it's actually something I've been thinking about, because I've done a few Jewish focused interviews for the book rollout. And, I think that I have always separated my Judaism, which I care a lot about, from my professional life. It feels very like my personal stuff and not necessarily professional. And I know that a lot of Jewish people I know, have more overlap. They work in Jewish media, for instance. I have very good friends who do. That hasn't been the way I did it. And I do wonder, was there something in there where I was embarrassed to maybe focus on a Jewish woman? I don't know, subconscious, it must have been subconscious if so. But, I feel like it's a very personal thing for me. I'm certainly, I belong to your temple, as you know, and I care deeply about my Judaism, and so do my children and my husband. But yeah, it's not something that I've dealt with on a professional level before. So, it feels,
Yeah,
and in today's world, it feels, even more fraught, obviously. So,
well, that's something I did want to ask you, because you do have these pretty in-depth biographies of your three lead characters who are great. And then you have these smaller biographies of Bessie Harmon, and then the Jewish woman in Hartford, which are also really interesting. And I was wondering, was that the original intention of the book, or was there was no pressure for you, was there, from either an editor or somebody to diversify the book, or was that just something that happened organically?
Yeah, I think it happened organically. I mean, basically what happened was I just had so much great material. And when you structure it as a biography, you're sort of limited to those three women and what they went through particularly, and I wanted to also get across the world of the department store. And there were so many other stories that were tangential to the three main narratives. So I kind of see it as a book about, the history of the department store, the history of women in work, and the history of these three women. So their narrative is the main thrust of the book, but there were so many great pieces that couldn't fit within that narrative that I wanted to get across, that I felt was important for understanding this universe of the department store. So, I mentioned some. I had, the history of the mannequin, who was, what was the deal with mannequins, which is actually a fascinating story in and of itself. How do I incorporate that, so I did them as, we called them vignettes. And I checked with my editor first. I was like, is this okay? Is this too confusing? I do worry a little bit about the structure of the book, but I feel like it worked. It was sort of these moments that I was able to incorporate that,
Oh, I think it works really well. I liked it a lot. I mean, I think what's really, to me, great about the book is that you use the stories of these women sort of as anchors to a larger story, which I think really works in a very compelling way. And I could see that was your intent, but I just threw it in there to be provocative.
I mean, I want to tell a diverse story, so, yeah. Yeah.
That was interesting that you heard from the granddaughter of one of your characters. Have you heard
Yeah.
from other family members or other people?
Yeah, so as part of my research, obviously, I did very intense research, as I'm sure you understand. It took, 3 or so years. So Hortense, as a Mormon, they care a lot about their genealogy. So I went to St. George and they have a pioneer museum there, run by the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. And I was able to, they have a lot of research about their own genealogy. So that was really helpful. And I was able to track down her grandchildren. She was the only one of the three characters who had children. For Dorothy, I really struggled. I could not find a living relative, even after going to Mina, etc. So I actually hired a genealogist who was fantastic, and he found her great niece, and she lived in Maryland at the time. She now lives in Texas. And I went down to Maryland. She was like, "Come on down. I happen to have a basement filled with stuff. You're welcome to look through it," which was, like manna from heaven for a researcher. Basically, Dorothy lived her whole life with her sister. They were spinsters. And Elsie, her sister, was an artist, and she created all this amazing art, and she wrote all these stories, and she created scrapbooks of their life together. So I found all these fantastic scrapbooks of, what it was like to arrive in 1919 in New York City, et cetera. So I was able to incorporate a lot of that, which was amazing. And then Geraldine, her sister, had 7 children. So I interviewed all of them. So and her stepdaughter who lives in London. So all of them I was able to speak with, and I've been in contact with. And actually, Emma, her stepdaughter who lives in London, actually came to New York for the book launch, which was amazing. And another, family member came to another stop I had in Rhode Island. So I've definitely been in touch with them, and it's been, really rewarding to feel like they were these fantastic, important lives. And, now I can kind of bring some recognition to them. So I think the family hopefully is feeling good about that.
And one of the things I was thinking about reading the book, and you've alluded to here, is that the idea, a lot of the things that every generation talks about, can you juggle work and children? All of that is an old story, right? And was your sense from what was your sense of the women in the group who didn't have children, which is 2 of the 3, did you sense any feeling of loss, or was
Yeah.
that just not interesting to them, or it just seemed impossible to them?
They were all such 3 very different women, very different
Mhm.
lives, very different choices, which actually I was grateful for. I felt like, you know, Hortense actually really resented her work at the end of her life. She felt like it was really detrimental to her family life and led to a lot of tragedy for her. And so she really, really regretted having a career. Dorothy just never wanted a career. I mean, a family life. As far as I can tell, she was just really kind of aped the male CEO. She was very interested in kind of, being in that business world. And to her, that was the most rewarding thing. And it was not a loss to not have a family, in that traditional sense. I think it would have been very hard for her to have the career she did and have a family. And Geraldine actually couldn't have children. And I think that was very, very hard for her. I don't know if she would have wanted to, but she wasn't given the choice. She had cancer early on and couldn't have children. So, but I felt like there was this continuum. They never met each other, as far as I can tell, or really interacted. They might have been in the same room for certain events, but they weren't, friends. They didn't meet. If it had been a fiction book, I would have had them meet, but they didn't. But I felt like they all sort of talked to one another and built on one another's stories. And I very much felt like while I was writing the book, I was in conversation with them. And there was this long continuum of women going through kind of the same things. And, I read these magazine articles from the 1930s, and I was like, this could have been written today. I mean, there was this Good Housekeeping article from 1932, and it was titled Marriage or Career. And this is 1932, it interviewed all these really successful women about whether they think successful women could have careers and have a marriage. I mean, it might as well have been today. It was just shocking to see the continuum that we're all on.
Yeah, that things don't change as much as we think or hope that they do. Um, you talk about Dorothy, and I think in some ways I mean, they're also interesting, but the fact of where she grew up, the history of racism in her family, and then she became, at least seems to have become a pretty strong civil rights activist. Could you
Yes.
just, I think that story is so fascinating. If you could just delve into it just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, she had an amazing life. She was such an adventurer. She was so ambitious. And she was very politically active, especially as she got older and more established in her career. As president of Lord and Taylor, she started these award ceremonies, which was essentially like a very fancy luncheon at the Waldorf Astoria. And she would invite these very important people. I mean, Einstein,
Oh,
Twyla Tharp, dance, everybody would like really intellectual. She was on the board of the NAACP. She was very active during like the McCarthy era and like, the Red Scare. She really spoke out against, the desire to all, to conform. She made a very special, famous speech about like conformity and the dangers of conformity. And I could never really prove, document, whether she was gay or not, or if she had boyfriends or what her personal life was, because those documents just don't seem to exist. But she certainly was very, very, intellectually curious and a leader. She even went to Russia during when Stalin was in charge, Stalinist Russia, which was, nobody did that. And she met with all these reporters and, she had these, very intellectual conversations. So she was just an amazing powerhouse of brain, I felt like. Um,
yeah, that's so interesting, especially coming off of what you had said towards the beginning of the program. And you write about in the book how the department stores had art exhibits and they were palaces of culture.
Function,
And
yeah.
where did that come from? Was that something that came from these women, or was that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, I mean, it was a different world, obviously. So financially, it made sense as a business model to have these kind of department stores, which don't make sense anymore. But it was partly, I think it was very much. It depended on the store, I should say. I mean, certainly men, Selfridges, for instance, maybe you've seen the show on PBS. I mean, he had really amazing vision for what, a store should be. And certainly there were visionaries, owners who were real visionaries. But I mean, like Hortense, for instance, she decided when she took over that she would have an open door policy where anyone who had any complaint or any thought could actually come up to her office and meet with her. And she would host these luncheons with customers, that sort of thing where she saw herself as a shopper. She understood what women wanted and she directed, she was the first one to think of hats, for instance, on the ground floor. Why not? You might have an impulse buy before they were hidden, way upstairs. So those kind of female intuitions. And certainly Geraldine, we didn't talk too much about her, but she did all of that too. She was very attuned to what women wanted and women's fashion. So
Yeah, so I'm curious, as you've been, you said, I think you said when we talked that you've had an event almost every single day since the book came out more than 3 weeks, almost a month ago, which is great. And I'm just curious, who comes? Is it like different ages, and what kind of questions people ask? Do people want to share I mean, I'd really like to know what your experience has been as the author, but also sort of now you're the guardian of this history to a certain extent.
yeah, it's been really interesting. I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but I always like write to an audience. I have someone in mind when I'm writing, and the past two books have been my mother. So she is sort of who I have as who I'm writing a book for. I'm writing it for my mom. Like I envision her being my reader. So the audience I mean, it has been wonderful to see young people interested in the book for sure, who don't know about this world and are interested in learning more. I would say that the majority have been sort of people who connected, who have that memory, who want to explore it more, who want to tell me about their experiences at stores and what it meant for them, or I have quite a few people who knew Geraldine, for instance, because she was more recent, who've worked for her. I had one person who emailed me recently who gave me the most amazing story about her, which I really wish I could have included in the book, you know, about what she told him about, he was a window dresser and windows were very important for department stores. And, you know, she gave him some amazing advice that lasted for the rest of his career. And just sort of, you know, so I feel like it's been a mix of all of that. You know, I also, yeah, I don't know. It's been an amalgam of different audience members. So hopefully.
Yeah, but yeah, no, because I was wondering, because I mean, for me, it brought back a lot of real and imagined memories, you know, and I don't know how many of them were things that I actually had from when I was first arrived in New York, and those stores still, you know, had a lot of power in them. Um, or how much of it comes from films and things like that. And I was wondering, in the course of doing this research, did you look at any of those old movies like Doris, I don't know, Kay Thompson or any of that? Did
Yeah,
that
I
somehow
did.
filter into your?
Yes, I did. I did for sure. I did, to get like the vibe and the feeling. You know, a lot of the books that have been written before were very much about the men who founded the stores. So there wasn't a lot about what it felt like in these stores in the 1930s or 20s or whatever. So being able to see the films and the TV, or the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, even, you know, that whole thing, I mean, really helped inform. I kind of had an inkling, but in terms of like what it smelled like or it felt like or all of that, it was very important, you know, because really there, yeah, there haven't been that much about that aspect of things. It's been much more like, you know, how they managed to find these, you know, found these big stores. So yeah, there wasn't, yeah, it was, I love those things too. I mean, who doesn't? So
So you've been having an incredible publishing experience, which, um, you know, I've had the good luck to have it a couple times in my life, when all of a sudden your book comes out and you're prepared to, like, you don't know what to prepare it, but you went really on the bestseller list immediately. You just have to tell me, did you I mean, the book to me felt like it was getting a lot of buzz ahead of time, but at what point did you feel, if ever, even now after it's already a success, did you have an inkling that this was going to be a big book?
no, I was like petrified. I have been petrified. I am a neurotic Jew. I did not expect any success. It's been so gratifying. You know, I think as writers, we toil alone in our rooms by ourselves. We have very few people who read the book first. You know, my fact checker, who I love, was one of my first readers. You know, my editor, you know, my husband. That was basically it. So that's all I had to go on, you know, three people. So no, I didn't. I really, it's a very scary experience. You know, I don't know. Yeah, I've been just very grateful. I'm very excited. You know, it's such a difficult business. So I know it's rare to get that like buzz. And yeah, I'm so happy, especially because it's not a celebrity driven, you know, I feel like right now, you know, the buzz in the industry is that it's very celebrity driven. You know, you need to kind of be a celebrity. These women, obviously, no one's really ever heard of them before. You know, women's history, it's not exactly, you know, the sexiest topic. So yeah, I'm just really grateful.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm going to give another plug for the book. Here it is. You should definitely read it. It's that great combination of a serious book that has an important history in it, but it's also fun. Somebody, I don't know, on NPR, I'm going to mangle this, but said it was like, you know, it's a great book because it's like fireflies buzzing something, casting light on some such. But it really is. It's sort of this book that it's like popcorn. You just keep eating it, but it's like also popcorn in a movie that's really serious and really interesting. So congratulations, Julie. It's really a pleasure to read it, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
Bye.